Welcome to the Expansionist Podcast with Shelley Shepard and Heather Drake. In each episode, we dive deep into conversations that challenge conventional thinking, amplify diverse voices, and foster a community grounded in wisdom, spirit, and love.
Episode of Expansionist Podcasting Conversations. I'm so happy that you're here today. Thank you for being here.
Oh, Shelley, it's my joy. It's my joy to have conversation with you, but it's our joy to podcast together. And welcome to all the listeners who might find themselves saying yes or no on the ideas that we present today. But hopefully they'll find some agreement or some curiosity will allow them to think about some of the things that we're talking about today.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I have heard several people commenting to me about how they enjoy our back and forthness in these times of choosing these topics, and sometimes wondering how we choose them. Like today's topic on compassion, I think has kind of been one that's maybe been closer to your heart and soul maybe than mine, but nonetheless, an important one, I think, just in our own lives, our own spiritual walks, and in our world today is, do we have compassion, and how do we get it, and where does it come from?
Do we have compassion? I think that that's something that we could look at evidence for, because sometimes when people say they have compassion, they actually maybe confusing it with something else. And so the idea of looking at the evidence of compassion might be a better place to start. And being able to say, how much compassion do we practice having with ourselves? Do we have an awareness of our inner compassionate witness?
That's a great question.
Or are we much more attuned to the inner critic? Whose voice are we listening to? And then paying attention to the inner witness who will lead us or who will highlight the voice of the Holy Spirit, the voice of love, the voice of goodness, the voice of wisdom. And how do we attune ourselves to those voices? And how do we train ourselves actually, or maybe nurture finding ways to pay attention to our inner witness?
I love these questions. And immediately my mind is going to one question. In our busyness, in just our day-to-day activities, how do we practice compassion? How do we find time for that?
Well, I don't know that we could. Maybe you could find time, but in my estimation, we have to choose time. We have to make time for compassion, because compassion runs counter the frenetic and the frantic pace that we're all at, where everything has to get done now. Compassion asks us to slow down, asks us to take a breath, asks us to listen, and all of those things take time. And so
yes,
we're actually coming back to this. What does it take for us to come to a realization or an understanding that in order for things to change, and I believe that all of us want change for the good, change in our lives, change in our world, we are going to have to slow down, and we are going to have to maybe take a different path. I'm always reminded of the ancient prophet Jeremiah, who said, "Stop and stand in the crossroads and ask yourselves, where are the ancient paths? Where are the good ways? And if you walk in them, you'll find rest for your souls." And I'm thinking, a lot of times we don't want ancient slow paths. We want superhighways. We want things that are going to get us somewhere faster, yes, as opposed to slower. And Jeremiah is offering the fact that if you take the ancient path, there'll be a rest for your soul. I think for many of us, the idea of our soul resting is not even on our radar at all.
No, absolutely.
And so what does it look like for us to honor rest, for us to pay attention to the fact that from a Sabbath or from a place of rest, that's really, really linked to belovedness, and paying attention to that kind of linking where I don't have to earn rest. Rest is gifted to me because I'm beloved. This is why in the Jewish tradition, a Sabbath is the beginning of the week. You start from a place of rest, and then love allows you to do the hard work. Not if I work hard enough, then I can earn rest. And so I think the same is true of ancient paths, or of these paths of contemplation, of the paths, the mystics, the paths that the wisdom teachers tell us are paths that require us to slow down, to watch our breath, to open our eyes, and to pay attention. And so while that's not like, here, take this pill and you can go faster, it's breathe here, pay attention to that, and can you practice the presence of love beside you?
So beautiful, coming from what I know you to be at the core, which is water. And I'm just going to linger here for a minute, because we're pretty much direct opposites elementally. I'm fire and you're water. And so I'm hearing these words of rest and periods of contemplation and inhaling and exhaling. And these are all practices that I have, but there is this inner urgency of fire. Like there's this spark and there's this intensity and there's this vibrancy to accomplish or to get a result or to, make something out of nothing. And that sometimes is almost as strong as stopping to breathe, to reminding myself, take this time to meditate, take this time to center and pray, or inhale and exhale. They're both very present. And yet when I hear you, it's like, that's so you, right? Like this is just, I know how you think about rest or solitude or these practices that you're defining with us today. And so in my mind, I'm wondering, how do we teach this to the fires in the world? How do we teach compassionate awareness? How do we do that?
You and I had a conversation. I don't know that that's so innate in me that it was just is something that I've always known, but it's something that I've heard teachings of, again, since I was little, and mostly from the wisdom teachers that I read, that in the library that belonged to my grandmother. Like I had this older person in my life who had accumulated a library, and I was little and an unrestricted reader. And they probably should have said, yeah, that's not for right now. But, the idea of even the mystics or the hermits or the monks and the nuns and the beautiful people that I read about as a very, very young girl, they all had practices like the rule of life or something that they had attributed it to. And so there is for me a beautiful hope, like throughout my whole life, that a maturing, hopefully becoming love itself is necessary. It's not automatic, is I think that idea that I won't just automatically get old and mature into love and mature into wisdom. In fact, I could be a very old person and be completely behaving like a toddler. I could be very selfish and very demanding, as opposed to going, there is a choice, there is a path that leads us into flourishing. And in our flourishing, the world flourishes, the people around us do. And this path of going, what does it look like for us to say, not just slowing down, but being able to question things, being able to observe things in ourselves, being able to let go of outcomes. Like these are all beautiful paths, but there are so many ways that we get to learn about these things through contemplative prayer, through the power of silence and solitude. But I think something that we have been circling around and talking so much about is how having an awareness of our compassionate inner witness absolutely can revolutionize the way that we live our life, the way that we live our spirituality, how we experience a life that is rich and full and delicious, and not just whatever is handed to us. Like, how do we set the table for ourselves and others and just eat of the good fruit that God has put in the world?
You and I had talked about earlier in the pre-show about this powerful question that was reflected as maybe one of the first compassion questions
Yes.
in Scripture. And I want us to linger there and talk a little bit about that. And maybe it's tied to this inner awareness, this inner witness, but that may also need to be defined a little bit, because I think most people would relate to the inner critic that you named earlier, our inner critic of being so hard on ourselves, or this lack of compassion for ourselves when we mess up, or when we think a certain way, or maybe we were told something. So maybe this "who told you that" question, maybe unpack that for us just a little bit here as we start to maybe this rendering of what it means to have an inner witness, and pay attention to the inner witness maybe more than the inner critic.
And I like to put in front of the inner witness a compassionate witness, because
Okay.
I think one of the things that is so inspiring to me is Jesus kept asking his followers, will you be my witness? Will you see this? Will you choose this? Will you pay attention here? And so nurturing a compassionate inner witness in us is really a practice of being in the present, not rehearsing everything that we've ever done wrong or in the past, although we can be a compassionate witness to, things that we've done or choices that we've made in the past. And it also kind of demands that we stay out of the fearful future or the unknown future. It is the practice of presence, right here, right now. How do I listen to myself? And how do I listen to the voice of the Holy Spirit and make a choice? How will I live right now? What will I do with this, whatever it is that has happened and is right in front of me? Taking a moment to breathe and listening to a compassionate witness saying, maybe this is a choice you've made in the past. We don't want to return to that. This is a choice that we've, maybe our religion told us that we had to make this choice. And maybe asking the question, like God asks Adam and Eve in the poetry in the beginning that says, who told you that? When God finds Adam and Eve hiding. And I wonder how often we find ourselves hiding in ourselves, hiding behind pre-programmed ideas or thoughts, or a script that someone gave us, or a truth that someone told us was the only way. And so being able to go back and question that, not question why, like you and I had talked about, that is a futility practice, but questioning and going, who told me this was the way? Who told me this was delicious? Who told me this was not? And then not entering into guilt or shame about any of those things, but really being able to practice going, I'm choosing love. I'm choosing the way of spirit. And when we find ourselves in a place that we don't want to be, instead of saying, I should have done it differently, or to bring some kind of judgment, just to bring the compassion. And I go back to Jesus and the teachings of Jesus, and over again, people would say of him, Jesus was moved with compassion. So the movement that I want in my heart, in my life, the movement that I want in the world is the movement of compassion. And so it starts with me. It starts with the inside of me before I can ask it to be anywhere else in the world.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful thoughts and words. Thank you for that. And as I was listening to who told you that, this could very well be the first compassionate question that was ever asked, because I don't see that question as judging. There wasn't this hammer that came down on the two of them. There wasn't an instruction to go to their separate corners and come out in 3 hours and let's have a discussion about this. It's this open invitation to this dialogue with the divine about what they were feeling or what they were thinking at that particular moment. And it unraveled in such a way, as we all are well aware, that it wasn't a blessing, that there was some kind of attachment there at the end that we've been told, or maybe that we have bought into ourselves, and which has helped to establish this inner critic in all of us. And swinging back to the other side of who told you that, who asked you that, it is prepping us for a greater understanding of compassion.
When I hear the retelling of that story, and we do look to scriptures for paths of wisdom, for truth that can allow us to expand our love and expand our connection to the divine and to each other, I think to myself, we probably never spend a whole lot of time witnessing our own lives. And I think that question asks us to do that. Who told you? Asks us to examine the thought, not in a way like you mentioned that is full of judgment, but that is curious. And I think that what I hear in the telling of that story is humanity is kind of always caught up wanting to be more deserving, more worthy, a better version of ourselves. And the invitation in that story is to be who you are at that moment and allow compassion, perhaps to make a different choice next time, maybe. But right now in this moment, the compassionate witness calls us out of hiding. And we get to enter into that beloved space of going, yeah, this is who I am, and I make bad choices, or this is who I am.
And this is one of the,
I think that there's something more when there isn't, instead of going, oh, you should have known it. I have heard stories in church, as you have, and even in people outside of church who have made this, like Genesis story, this beginning story, to be about how wrong we are, or how, we're people who messed up from the very beginning. I don't think compassion asks us to read this story in that way or see the story in that way.
No.
Because love is full of compassion. God, who is great in compassion, mercy, and is full of compassion here. And so love itself said, who told you that? I wonder how often we ask ourselves, who told us that we were not enough? Who told us that we should be better? Who told us that somehow we live in scarcity and not abundance? Who told us that we were not enough?
Yes. And this is why we are having this podcast, is to expand understanding, to expand a story, to tell a better story, to expand theology in ways that is more inclusive of the divine nature of God. Like the divine nature would say, who told you that? And ask me to reflect, not judge.
Oh, but the stories that I heard, in our growing up years, and even the stories that I've repeated and the stories I've told myself is, after love has a question with you, after you found yourself in hiding, that we should just really find better ways to police ourselves, or to make the road more narrow, or make it harder, and instead of going, what is leading to freedom? A compassionate witness leads to real freedom. A compassionate witness leads us to mercy, leads us to more love for ourselves and others. And that's movement. Often when I find
that's expansion.
Yeah, often when I find that friends are stuck, or people that I love are stuck, I always want to go, where is the inner critic speaking so loudly that we just can't move? And how compassion compels us to move. And compassion does come from the very inner parts of us. But I believe in our humanity, we have to be taught compassion. We have to have it modeled to us. And very often it's not. Our families, our cultures have not modeled it. So how do we find a witness of compassion? That's what I love so much about the story of Mary Magdalene and of Jesus. We see this compassionate relationship toward each other, toward the world, and looking at that and going, how did Jesus respond to people that were in need? Always with compassion. And so how,
I want to share this.
yeah, go ahead.
No,
I was just
finish.
going to say, so then how
Finish your
would
thought.
love respond to me? Not with, you should have done better, you should have known better, you should have, been tighter with this, as opposed to going, allow yourself to feel that, to move through that, and be compassionate. And I think that the compassion allows curiosity, allows us to ask ourselves, how do we really pay attention to our own lives, to our flourishing, and to the flourishing of others? We want to pause and take a moment and let you know how glad we are that you've joined us. If you're enjoying this podcast, consider sharing it with a friend. And if you found the conversation intriguing and want to know more about what we're learning or how you can join our online community, visit our website at expansionisttheology.com.
Compassion is simply being moved in our depths by others' experiences and responding in a way that intends either to ease their suffering or promote their flourishing. And that, the beginning of that, being moved in our depths, right, at the deepest part of our own selves, by others' experiences and responding in a way, wow, that eases somebody else's suffering or promotes their flourishing. Not just ease their suffering, but promotes flourishing. I think that is that's a piece too, Heather, that I think we see maybe in our minds. We've been given this definition of compassion is, oh, I just have to give to the poor more, or I have to give to this charity more, or I have to, I have to go down and volunteer, to read to the first grade class. We see these beautiful examples of compassion poured out in our society and in our culture. But the second part of that definition is promotes their flourishing.
Well, when you
that's
said
a different
that definition,
that's
I
a different
don't
part of
in
the
any way
definition.
disagree, but I just would like to expand on it, because I think compassion starts with us. We have to want that for ourselves first, to be compassionate toward
Absolutely.
our own suffering, toward our own misfortune, toward our own person. I think that's very much like the teaching of Jesus that says, love yourself and then love your neighbor. Be compassionate toward yourself, toward your own suffering, toward your own hurt.
Sure.
And then I think that I loved that definition requires us or asks us to go into the flourishing of someone else, or the future event flourishing. And what that means when I have compassion on myself, I do understand that there will be not a stagnation, but a movement, an expansion. The same is true for the world. When I'm compassionate to other people, I think, yes, we have to feed people more because there's still people hungry. And yes, it's really great for us to read to first graders. But finding places just to say, I have to do more, I think that comes from a very harsh idea of God. And maybe that's the way we've always seen God, or that's the way it's been presented to us. That sounds a lot more like Zeus than God, who is loving and who invites us into the table or into the work that is being done in kingdom. It's an invitation to walk alongside. But I am confident in the fact that if we were to hear the voice of love really help us to examine our thoughts and ourselves, to be a compassionate inner witness, to say, right now, I'm experiencing a lot of anxiety, and then ask ourselves the question, why? What am I anxious about? And not in a way that is judgmental or critical, but go, what am I trying to protect myself from? What am I trying to control an outcome for? What am I trying to present to the world? And be compassionate and curious about these things that actually drive us. And sometimes we're on autopilot. And I just don't believe that on autopilot we can truly savor the beautiful lives that we have been gifted, and paying attention to the gifts that are around us and the gifts that are in us. How do we witness the inner gifts that love has given us for the world? How do we pay attention to these things and nurture them? It comes, I think, first through a compassionate witness. I do want to change the world.
Well, you bring up a great point, I think, in any practice, which is put your mask on first, right? Like, how can you teach anything really, or practice something if you haven't put yourself in first position in that regard? And so I love that you bring this out to today on how do we actually begin to see within our own selves and practice compassion and not just the inner critic space. And I think that requires maybe for different people it requires different situations based on your personality or how you ground yourself or how you express, right? One of the books that has helped shaped my inner compassion is by Frank Rogers. His book on compassionate practices. He has an acronym that he has put together, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but you have mentioned this over and over. His acronym for compassionate practices is PULSE, and the P of this acronym is paying attention. He does say perceiving another's experience with non-judgmental, non-reactive clarity, that paying attention. And so assuming that you're doing these practices unto yourself first before you do them to others, what this paying attention, you've mentioned it like 3 or 4 times, paying attention. How do I pay attention to compassion in myself, right? Is it this question, this first compassionate question that we just talked about? Paying attention without judgment, without reaction, right? Without being reactive to a situation. How do you pay attention?
One of the ways that I have practiced the intentional nurturing of a compassionate witness is paying attention when someone displays anger. And anger has always been something that I'm really uncomfortable with. My own anger, firstly, but also the anger of other people, and largely because the protectors in my life were very angry with me. And anger felt out of control for me, and anger in the way that I narrated my life always ended up in something that was very harmful. So even as an adult, when I was in the presence of someone who was experiencing anger, I would feel a trauma in my own body. Sometimes not aware of it. I would just want to leave uncomfortable situations. I would want to get out, or I would want to stop someone's angry expression. And when I began to be compassionate and ask myself the question, what am I afraid of right now? What am I uncomfortable with? I was remembering one time when one of my babies was a toddler, and they were experiencing a great frustration and didn't have language to express it. And so was absolutely throwing a huge fit, like a full-on on the ground, kicking, crying. And this is a person who doesn't, again, have a language for what they want, what they're experiencing, what's happening. And all at once, I just picked up this little person and I said, come here, my little darling, my angry little darling. And I just began to kiss their head, and they were so angry, Shelley. There was thumping and still screaming. And I just kissed their little head until they stopped crying and said, you're just my angry little darling, and it's okay. And I remembered observing that and observing what happened to the angry feeling, and then thought to myself, is there a way that I could attend to my own heart when someone was feeling angry, or attend to theirs in the same way? I was just observing this little helpless toddler. And I'm not saying I put myself in situations when someone's anger is out of control or is, abusive. But I am talking about being aware of inner struggles or programming or thoughts that we have regarding situations we're in or have been in. And how do we move with compassion? I moved with a lot of compassion toward this little toddler who was so frustrated. But I did
Yes.
not move toward compassion with
Yes.
adults in my life that were frustrated because they should have known better, or they should have done it differently, or they should have controlled it
Mm.
in a way that makes everyone else feel. Instead of having compassion, I had a lot of judgment. And I also had a lot of judgment for myself. Why are you even in this situation? And so all of
Yes.
the judgment and all of the rules and all of the policing never brought comfort. And so paying attention to the way that I nurtured other things that were flourishing really helped me become aware of a compassionate witness that says, I have a choice in every choice that I make, in every situation I'm in. I can pay attention to the voice of the Holy Spirit, who is a guide, a comforter, a helper, an explainer, but starting first to be aware of where I feel a need to control an outcome in someone else, to control an outcome in me. Those are beautiful places to begin to say, where's the compassion? The compassion that will move us from this place
Mm.
that feels uncomfortable or needs healing. But in all the places that we judge need change, how does compassion first ask us to pick up those pieces and maybe even of our own soul and go, come here, my precious little angry darling. Sometimes it's as easy as looking
Yeah.
at that. And other times it's a little bit harder, but we start with the things that are easy and we practice
Mm-hmm.
those. And that's kind of the entry point into
Mm.
flourishing.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that story. And what I see in that example is the paying attention part, the part in the beginning of this cast together, where you mentioned there's a slowing down, there's a recognizing that there's a shift in energy that is required, a different shift in energy that is required from me as a fire. If I'm paying attention, I can't pay attention at 80 miles an hour, right? To very many things, except maybe the brake lights in front of me. But if I am paying attention, then I am ultimately slowing down, and I'm recognizing something that's going on outside of my body, and then taking that time to recognize and appreciate that compassionate witness inside. I think that's a beautiful step that you've shared here today. And hopefully as people listen, and I'm sure we'll have other conversations around compassion, but yeah, I would love for us to expand compassion into the world through our lives, through our works, and through our own spirit, to help others see that this might be missing, that this might be missing a practice.
One of the things that has been so helpful or hopeful in my own particular journey is looking at scripts or stories that I've had of my past with a compassionate witness, and being able to see how it can bring not rewriting the story, but having a different perspective or a more compassionate lens on some of the choices that I made or the situations that I found myself in was a real method of healing. And so I think that it is such a beautiful invitation for us to consider, how can we nurture, how can we agree with, or at least even experiment with, what is it like to be a person who practices an inner compassion, a compassionate witness. And it requires us to stay awake too. You have referenced a few times elements and how you view the world and how you view people being made in this way. And that comes from a teaching from the book called The Path. I'm sure it's in other places
Yes.
too, but by
Yes.
Lori Beth Jones. And so if people want to find out why you call yourself a fire and why you call me water, then maybe they also want to look at these elemental things and go, how do we find that? We find so many references to the elements, and even how God describes God's self through elemental
Absolutely.
things, how we can move through it. I first found the book extremely helpful when we wanted to start a project that was bigger than we could figure out how to do by ourselves. It seemed like a project beyond our scope or what we had resources for. And really finding that book to be so unbelievably empowering was, again, we live in the reference of some of those things today, but paying attention, I think even that, a compassionate witness, if we know what the elements are that kind of drive us or at least are in the center of us, moving us toward things, it's a way to practice a certain kind of compassion to yourself, to know that maybe I have a whole ball of fire in the middle of me. And maybe we won't be as hard on ourselves, recognizing, these are more than embers, or this is not just one thing. This is, the very center of myself. I think that can lead us to just a great compassion, and a compassion that leads us into movement.
And I'll just put a plug here for the Path Elements. In the month of June, leading up to the Feast of Mary Magdalene, we're offering a free assessment for anyone who wants to take the Path Elements assessment and has heard it either through the podcast or through the blogging on Substack. So we'll put a little reminder in maybe the show notes for people that might want to experiment with that.
And as someone who has taken the test, you and the people that designed it made it so incredibly easy. Sometimes the thought of taking another test is just, oh my God, I don't have the capacity for that. But this is incredibly simple, and it won't take an emotional toll on you to take the test. You won't have to study
because that would take us outside of compassion if we did it that way.
In fact, I think it is a practice of awareness, even taking the assessment. You become aware of things that you that are at the center of your being. And I think that coming back to the center of ourselves really helps ground us in our belonging. Because from the very beginning, our worthiness was gifted to us even before our birth. Our belonging was gifted to us even before our birth. We belong in love. We are made in love. And sometimes, we need someone to teach us about who we really are. Sometimes our families did a good job, and kudos when they did, to tell us who we are, what we belong. But we can reteach ourselves when someone has given us bad info, when we have looked at ourselves and we hear God say, who told you that?
Absolutely. I love the question.
Who told you that you weren't enough or you didn't have what it takes? Who told you that you should be someone other than you are? And we listen to that first compassionate voice go, oh, maybe I'm allowed to be as fiery as I need to be. Maybe I put that fire on the altar and God brings the sacredness to it, and it doesn't.
Well, there's compassionate fire. There's definitely compassionate fire.
Well, I would imagine that, especially on a winter's day, I could go there. You do a compassionate fire when you are freezing, or when you need to boil water. There's a compassionate cup of tea.
Well, look at it this way: a first responder is a compassionate fire. And so sometimes it's how we frame and understand ourselves elementally that can lead us into greater depths of understanding compassion. So I'm excited that we've had this conversation today, and for the opportunity to become more aware of the compassionate witness within, and also this first P of the compassionate pulse, which is paying attention. What a great place to begin. Thank you for your time today.
It was our joy to have you listen to our conversation today. If you would like further information or for more content, visit us at expansionisttheology.com.